Today's webinar is on inspection results for agricultural dealerships. I'm Ryan Bast of the Motor Safety Association, and the Motor Safety Association has partnered with John Schmeiser and the good folks of CWEDA, the Canada West Equipment Dealers Association, to deliver webinar presentations to their membership. I'd like to acknowledge John and Marty Cobb, the Executive Director of the Motor Safety Association, for having the vision to set up these webinar presentations so that we can deliver them to the membership of CWEDA quarterly. You may have noticed some of you guys may not be able to speak on the chat system here on the webinar. That's just because I muted your telephone prompt box just so that you're able to, we can have the presentation without too much feedback. So I encourage everybody to enter any questions into the chat box or comments that they might have. A little bit about myself and the Motor Safety Association. We are a non-government, non-profit group. In Saskatchewan, we look after any business that sells or services machines and equipment with a motor and steering wheel on it. So that would make up all of the farm dealers in Saskatchewan, the car dealers, the auto body shops, the tire shops, the towing companies, the gas stations. We are your provincial safety association. So some of the things we help out with are safety program development, mentorship, getting people advised on different safety issues and concerns, and we offer training. We do not charge any of the Saskatchewan members for any of our safety services. So if you do have questions, feel free to contact us if you need us to come out and help you guys in any way. A little bit about me. I worked in the farm dealership for 14 years and for a farm manufacturer for a year. I spent some time out working at the dealership in both the parts department and service department. One of my first jobs was putting the shovels, cultivator shovels on, and washing and detailing tractors. So that's kind of where I got my first taste of safety, was in the farm dealerships when I was on the safety committee. Today's agenda is we're going to talk a lot about the inspection results and some of the things that we have seen at the farm dealerships. We can also notice I spoke a bit about the Motor Safety Association services. The good folks at CWEDA, they've also teamed up with another group called BDC, and BDC, they also offer similar safety services that we do for the other provinces that aren't covered under the motor safety, because we kind of look after just Saskatchewan, but the BDC group would be able to help all of the provinces who are members of CWEDA with safety concerns and inquiries as well. So just take a look at the picture. We talk about how things have changed a lot over the years. On the top corner, that's a 1928 Rumley oil pull tractor, which is started with a flywheel. There's no PTO guards or shielding. There's an open flywheel turning, no rollover protection, no seatbelt or lights. When you look to the bottom, this purple tractor, that's got all of those features. So you could just see how things have changed over the over many years to evolve from the one piece of equipment to the next, even from the steel wheels to the rubber, how things have evolved so much. So as I spoke of a bit earlier, our goals with these online webinars are to keep them to an hour or less. We realize you guys are busy and have businesses to run, so we want to keep them to an hour or less, and we've seen this as a good opportunity for discussion amongst safety coordinators and safety committee members from BC to Manitoba. So there shouldn't really be any borders when it comes to safety, so we should all be able to share information and work together with the common goal of injury prevention. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the group at bdc.ca is available to assist you folks as well with similar safety services. So some of the inspection results that we're going to talk about is, when we look at things that we see in the dealerships, I might tell you, hey, you need to fix this at your store. But you might say, hey, is that the law? Do I need to fix that? Is that something that's in legislation? Well, in some cases, yes. Some of the things that we indicate fall under the Saskatchewan occupational health and safety legislation. Some may be from federal legislation, the CSA standard, or the National Fire Code. And some are just industry best practices. They're just a good idea to do. So we're going to just share some of the pictures and findings over some of the things that we've seen. We inspect approximately 100 shops per year across Saskatchewan, so we do see a lot of different outcomes and different situations when we get to these dealerships. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, this is really the last line of defense for the employee at the dealership. But before you get to the point where you need to use that personal protective equipment, it's a good practice to look at other methods first that you might be able to eliminate that hazard, or you can engineer it and come up with a barrier or an administrative control, a policy, or some kind of substitution so that we can remove ourselves from that hazardous situation. So personal protective equipment is utilized if all else fails. But as a dealership, it is your responsibility to have access and provide the personal protective equipment to the staff and make sure that they're wearing it correctly. And if they're not, what kind of enforcement is in place to ensure that they are wearing their personal protective equipment? I've seen this guy before at some of your dealerships. This is the guy who thinks that the safety rules do not apply to him. The guy with his eyeglasses, safety glasses on his forehead. That's unfortunate that we still run into those situations. And a lot of that comes down to the safety culture and the beliefs and values of the staff members. Good management and good leadership and good human resource practices by bringing in the right people to your team from day one, having good management and leadership that lead by example and show people how they're supposed to work. Being a role model, wearing their personal protective equipment, because if your staff sees that you're doing it, they're going to do it as well. So as managers, you want to lead by example just to ensure that your staff are doing what they see you're doing and following the company policies. Housekeeping is another concern that really varies when we get to a lot of locations. From this here diagram, you can see the many hazards. We've got slip and trip hazards on the floor. We've got air hoses, oil spills. We've got a suspended load on a cherry picker and electrical hazards. A lot of things on this picture are wrong. But when you get to your dealership, think about these things. If you have an oil spill, clean it up. If there's air hoses on the floor, put them away, hang them up so people aren't tripping on them. Once the garbage cans, don't let them overflow, empty them ahead of time so that they aren't overflowing all over the place. Dead batteries is something where we see piles of them stocked up. So some of these things when it comes to housekeeping, just allowing a little bit of time to make those changes and cleaning up, allowing some time for cleanup is going to keep people safer too so that they don't have to deal with this cluster. How many pails do you really need? I'm not sure, was at this here dealership, there was literally hundreds of oily 5-gallon pails, but and that's something that unfortunately we encounter too often. These truly are a fire hazard with the plastic and the oil residue in them, so only keep what you need on hand. You don't need to keep hundreds of oily pails in your dealership. Would you use this first aid kit? What if your children worked at this dealership? Would you want them to work there and have to use this eye wash station? Do you have first aid kits in your dealership or in your shop trucks? If you do, maybe you should, if you don't, you should maybe take a look at why not and have those installed. This eye wash station is filthy, it's outdated, and I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't be comfortable with that situation in my dealership either. So when you think about first aid kits, you want to ensure that your kits are restocked, they're clean, You document in the logbook what you're using, and there's reasons for that. When you make that documentation, you can see what first aid supplies you're using, and you can also see how people are getting injured. And you can look at prevention methods. If people are cutting their hands, why are they cutting their hands? Look at that, and you can trace why that's happening. Also, it helps with you reordering items for your first aid kit by seeing what's being used. So those are a few very important aspects of having a first aid kit in the dealership. Emergency response is very critical. A lot of people may not be aware of where their muster point is in case of an emergency. Where did they go? Do you guys have a fire drill? Well, in Saskatchewan, with the recent changes to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there's about $1,600 worth of applicable fines if you don't have a fire drill, if you don't have a fire response plan, or a fire evacuation map posted. So there's a whole series of fines applicable if you aren't set up as far as developing your emergency response plan. And do people know the first aid and emergency procedures? Do they know who the first aid attendant is? In case of an emergency, what do you do? People need to know the answers to these questions before they start working. I know of a location that I spoke to. There was actually a fire in the building, and the people never left the store because the smoke wasn't bothering them. They kept working. They just didn't understand understand that in case of a fire, you're supposed to leave your building. Here's an example of guarding. On this here angle grinder, the guard is removed, it's duct taped together, and I'm sure if I could see the cord in, I'd realize that it's taped with electrical cord. So with something like this, you want to ensure with angle grinders that your RPM is adequate for the wheel that you're using. And sometimes the decal comes off and you don't know what the RPM rating is of your machine. So a good practice is to engrave the RPM right onto the angle grinder so you know what the RPM is so that you can use the applicable grinding wheel. You don't want to use the incorrect wheel because those grinding wheels can bust. Some other examples of guarding in the dealership that we sometimes see missing on inspections are at the air compressor. Sometimes the shields are off of the air compressor belt and that belt is exposed. How about bench grinders? I know that we commonly see situations where the ledger plate is too far away from the grinding wheel. Because these are continuously wearing, you don't want a huge gap in here for parts to get jammed in. You want to have that set very close to the wheel, about 3 millimeters, just to ensure that you keep that distance tight. And you don't want to use the side of the wheel or use these grinding wheels for grinding on aluminum. Make sure your visors, you can see through them so that if you can't see through the guard or the shield, it isn't going to do you much good. It's going to cause you more of a hazard. So keep these clean and keep your personal protective visors and shields clean also that you're using. Press guards. So to prevent an injury from materials from a press contacting you, you can install a press guard or curtain or a wrap. This first picture illustrates a press guard, and there's basically a door and a hinge that opens and closes so you can put the part in and you can work the press so the operator is protected. Actually, one dealership I was at in southeast Saskatchewan, they used a concave from a rotary combine on a hinge pin, and they used that as a guard door. They would swing it in and out as they needed it. So that was pretty neat. The second picture is a press wrap, and this is a foil-like material that you can use to wrap up the part and part of the press that you're wrapping. Therefore, it's not going to contact yourself. The issue with this product is you can't really see what you're doing as far as having visibility of what you're pressing. So those are a couple of options available to you. Electrical hazards. Something that we commonly come across is the access to the electrical panel boxes. And in some dealerships, people see that, whoo-hoo, free space, and they pile up all their crap in front of the electrical panel boxes, therefore limiting access to it. One location I was at, they actually physically installed a barrier in the floor a certain distance away from the panel box so that people couldn't stack parts and couldn't stack material in front of the breaker box. It had to be up against that panel, up against that shielding or that barrier and further. So that seemed to be a good control they put into place. We also see uncovered switch plates and uncovered plugins like this, or frayed cord ends. Electrical hazards are something not to be taken lightly. You want to take a close look at some of these concerns and have them addressed. Looks like they put one too many bricks on this shelf, but how would they know how many bricks they could put on this shelf if the shelving isn't labeled for the capacity? How much can you put on here if you don't know what it holds? So when you have shelving and racking, you want to ensure that you know what the capacity of that shelf is. How much items can you put on it? Sometimes in a homemade shelf, you have no idea what that capacity is unless it's engineered or certified with an engineered label or capacity label. And you want to make sure it's secured to the floor. I've seen sometimes where they've been bolted down to the floor or to the wall so that it's not going to move around on you. How about your mezzanine level? This is something that we commonly come across as a bit of an issue because sometimes people leave the access doors open when it's not in use. Well, under Saskatchewan Occupational Offence Act for summary tickets, if that's over 3 meters, you can be fined $1,000 if you leave that open. So that's something you want to be aware of by closing that door to prevent somebody from falling down and getting hurt or an item from falling down and hurting somebody. You also want to pay attention to this lower toe board or kick plate. That needs to be about 5 inches in height also, just to prevent parts and various things from getting underneath it and falling out. But just to keep in mind, keep those doors closed when not in use, and having them painted a bright color doesn't hurt either. Compressed cylinders. When you store these cylinders, you want to keep them out of direct sunlight, and you want to have a safety chain around the tanks, and they want to be capped. That's the proper way to store compressed cylinder tanks. These Flashback Arrestor devices, this here is located in the correct spot. It has to be between the hose and the regulator. That's where you want these devices placed. So check on your tanks in your dealership and ensure that your flashback arrestors are located here. Sometimes we see them by the nozzle end, but that's incorrect. This is the location where these arrestors need to be installed. Your Varsol tanks are open. Why are these tanks open when they're not in use? These could serve as a fire hazard if sparks and other items were to fly into that tank from a welding spark. You could be looking at a flammable situation. Some of the newer tanks have a fusible link in the hinge mechanism. So if there is a fire, well, as soon as this gets warm, this closes the lid so that it can't spread. So that's a pretty good thing to have in place. With one of these tanks, you also want to ensure that it has a grounded 3-pronged plug-in. That's very important when you are having a mechanism like this, that it's wired and grounded properly. These all factor into many different fire hazards for these tanks by leaving them open. How about outside your dealership? Around your gas meter? Is that barriered? Well, if not, what if somebody drove into it with their vehicle? Or what if the guy pushing snow because he wants to push every single snowflake away from the building was where he hooked into that or drove his vehicle into that barrier? Well, it's better hitting the barrier than the gas meter. So just keep those things in mind. This doesn't cost a lot of money or time to build a mechanism like this. My only recommendation would be maybe to put some yellow paint on it so it's a little more high visible. But no, it's a great thing to have in place, some sort of a barrier around your gas meter lines. Let's look at jack stands for a few minutes. When we look at jack stands, you should know, if I would ask you, can I use this jack stand for my four-wheel drive tractor? Would you be able to tell me that? Well, without knowing the load capacity of your jack or the weight of your object, you wouldn't be able to tell me that. These jacks have really changed. This older style with the ratcheting mechanism and these welds are somewhat known to give a bit of problems. So this is the new style of jack stand that a lot of dealerships have been using. So they lift the platform into place and slide in the pin. They're quite a bit safer too, and they've got a nice stable base opposed to these tipsy four-corner bases on them. But when you're looking at these items, you need to know your capacities for your slings and your chains. If you don't know the capacity, how do you know what the safe operating limit is? Pre-shift inspections. You are required to do a pre-shift inspection of your forklift and cranes, hoists, and shop trucks and slings. It doesn't need to be a long inspection, but it needs to be a documented inspection that shows that you've checked that item before you used it. This is helpful to identify a concern before an accident happens. When you do an inspection, if you see an issue that has arose, you could deal with it before it turns into an incident. Remember, documentation is critical. In the event of an accident, OH&S will ask your dealership if they could see your pre-shift inspection for your hoist or your crane. So you want to have that information readily available in case they were to ask for that in the event of an emergent situation after an accident has happened. How about doing inspections of your extinguishers and backup lights? Well, a lot of people don't realize, but fire extinguishers are to be inspected monthly as per the National Fire Code of Canada. And a good thing is to have somebody do it different every time, so it's not the same person doing it. This is advantageous because everybody else learns the location of the extinguishers and where they are kept and stored. During these monthly inspections, it's a good opportunity to clean them and just check them over. Make sure that they're charged up, that the hose is in place, and the pins in as well, so that it's in functional use in case you need it. So there's little tags that you can use for monthly fire extinguisher inspections. How about on your backup lights? You see on this picture on the left-hand side, there's a little red button, and that button's used to test your backup lights monthly to ensure that they're functioning properly. If you don't test them, how do you know if they're working or not? I really like these here assemblies because you can use them as a backup light mechanism as well as an exit signage for your entrances and exits. So those are a really good thing to have in place because they really serve more than one purpose. Drain pits. Do you have a drain pit in your dealership? Do you guys have a barrier or a cover for it when it's not in use? You too can also be fined from OH&S if you have an open area where somebody can fall and be injured. So be sure to keep a barrier in place or some sort of support or control mechanism to keep people from falling into that area. I've seen some rails that basically they fold up and they fold down. So if you're using the device, you would fold it down, but when it's not in use, you fold it and it stands up. So these work really good as well on the dealerships. Ergonomics. Ergonomics is essentially fitting the task to the worker and finding a safer way to get the job done while reducing the chance of getting an injury. I like to think of ergonomics as working smarter and not harder. We teamed up with a local agricultural dealership and we came up with a winching process to remove concaves from rotary combines. This ended up working quite well. If you go to our website, there's a completed Prairie Farm Report video and case study that talks about our research and the controls that we brought into place on this project. So I just want everybody to think about that. What kind of ergonomic hazards are there at their dealership, and to type them into the chat box, because the Motor Safety Association, we are always looking for ergonomic challenges and things that we can do to help our dealerships out. How about these parts department anti-fatigue mats or ergo cushions for their shoes? These are very helpful devices from reducing the impact on their joints, on the muscle and feet from standing all day. The mats work very well because it really absorbs a lot of that impact from before it comes into your joints and causes you to be tired and sore. These cushion shoe supports also work good, but they are limited. If you are to go outside with them in different conditions, they may not be the best. So you just want to ensure that you use these for the correct application so that you don't get into a situation where you do have a slip or a fall just because of the terrain. But all in all, if both of these things are used correctly, they are very helpful to the person that's using them. What about signage in the dealership? Safety signage reinforces your rules and shows due diligence on the dealership's behalf. It's also a good reminder for staff and visitors to know this is where this dealership keeps the fire extinguishers. Oh, this is employees only in this area. So you're going to want to have your signs up in place so people know what the requirements are, and it does serve as a constant reminder. Is your piping clearly marked? In the dealerships, there's many lines and hoses and pipes that are running along the walls. A good idea is to label them so you know that this is air or oil or natural gas. You like to know what's flowing through these lines, because what if I was to clip one of them with a piece of equipment and I wasn't sure what product was coming out of it? It's a good idea to have these covered up, these lines labeled. And they don't have to be a label like that. You could use a color-coded arrow and have a legend map, something like that, like a blue arrow means water, or a yellow arrow means natural gas, etc. So people can understand what's in it. But as long as you're consistent and have a bit of a map so people understand what's in the lines so they can identify it in case of an emergency. What about posting your noise levels? When we do inspections, we commonly see that a lot of people haven't done this. So I ask you, have you had your noise levels tested at your dealership to know how loud your air compressor is, your power tools, or machinery? Legislation indicates that you need to have your noise levels posted. And over an 85 decibel average in an 8-hour day requires you to wear ear protection. Sometimes people may not realize how loud 85 decibels is until they actually had a noise level test done. I can tell you that the person operating the pressure washer, that's about 85 decibels. Or the person vacuuming out the cab of the tractor or combine, that's also about 85 decibels. So pay attention to those people who are in your detailing department, because they're exposed at about 85 decibels for all 8 hours of the day. So that gives you a bit of an idea. And for the Saskatchewan members, we can come out and do your noise level testing for you at no additional charge or fee. Battery filling stations. Something that we commonly come across is we don't see personal protective equipment being worn around these filling stations, nor do we see the MSDS sheet for battery acid. What about a spill containment kit if you do spill that barrel of acid? These are things that you need to have in place if you are in the practices of filling batteries. There are a lot of dealerships I've been to in recent years tell me that most of the batteries now are shipped and they are wet, so they aren't filling the batteries anymore. So that's kind of an example of where the hazard's been eliminated from filling the batteries. You have the hazard of moving these batteries now. They're full and they're very heavy, so you want to be using the correct lifting techniques for that. So, but just keep in mind, if you are filling batteries and you have those in your workstation, you're going to want to make sure that you have the personal protective equipment, your MSDS sheets, and a spill containment kit. How about Whmis? Whmis stands for Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. The purpose of Whmis is to ensure that workers have the information they need to work safely with these hazardous materials. The Whmis program has three components: labels, and MSDS, and worker education. So I'll ask you, does all your staff have Whmis training? If not, we have some good online Whmis courses available on our website. What's in that bottle? Is that Coke? Or is that Roundup? Or motor oil? It says Coke, but is it really Coke? Workplace labels and labeling decanted products is critical because we don't want someone to drink a product that wasn't meant to be drank. Same with fuel jugs. We sometimes see these stored in improper areas. I've seen these stored where people are welding and their sparks are flying, and they're right near the fuel jugs. So you want to actually keep your fuel jugs outdoors in a cabinet or outdoor locker. You can see the 8 Whmis symbols on this chart, and it's a good reference point for people to be aware of. But I encourage you to take the Whmis training if you haven't done so yet already. Material safety data sheets, or also known as MSDSs, need to be in place for every chemical you use in your workplace. This information also gives first aid treatment and supplier contact information for each chemical. Be sure that when you update these every 3 years, that you save your outdated MSDS sheets. Don't just throw them away, because if a WCB claim ever arises and the root cause is deemed as a chemical they used at your dealership and there's no MSDS sheet for it from 10 years ago, if you have the information about what the chemical is and it's some of this stuff pertaining to that product, you would be able to protect yourself in the event of that claim. So I believe actually it's in Manitoba, their legislation requires you to save your outdated MSDS sheets for up to 30 years. So that's a good practice if you're not already doing that. I do prefer seeing the MSDS sheet binder, having the hard copy readily available, but sometimes places too do have it online, and this works well as long as your staff have access to computers and they all know how to use it, and you have a battery backup in case the power goes out and you need to access those MSDS sheets. So by having a desktop shortcut where people can click on to access them would be quite helpful as well. Do you guys have safety meetings at your dealership? What about a safety committee or representative? Your committee members need to be trained for their duties. Employees and employers and co-chairs and committee members. If you have 10 or more people at your dealership, you're required to have a safety committee. If you have less than that, you're required to have a safety representative. So we do have level 2 Saskatchewan Health and Safety Committee training on our website, but level 1 you still have to take from OH&S. Does your committee perform inspections? Well, if not, a good opportunity for them is to conduct inspections and get them to rotate through areas that may not necessarily be their normal workstation. So have the parts department inspect the service department and vice versa. By having a fresh set of eyes, it's going to be helpful identifying hazards. It's important also to make sure management attends these committee meetings, because if it is required that you have management representation, and also if you need to, one of the decisions are purchasing a piece of equipment or some products relating to safety, they can be dealt with at the meeting level. Do you have a safety bulletin board? Sometimes our inspections have indicated that dealerships haven't had these. If you do, you want to make sure that you have your health and safety acts and regulation readily available to the staff. Make sure that board includes your safety policy statement, meeting minutes, inspection results, your committee members and how long they're on the term for, what their posting is, as well as the names of the first aid attendants. So if you don't have one, get a safety board. It's a great resource for staff to have all their safety information in one spot. It's also good, like I said, you can post your committee minutes on there. You can have your MSDS sheets, inspections and investigation reports, information from OH&S or WCB. Just keep in mind to change it up so it's not outdated. If something is old on there, remove it just to try and keep the information as fresh as possible. How many of you have a poster in your dealership with the workers' 3 rights on them? Well, if you don't, you could print this here slide out, then you would have a poster. A lot of people are aware of the right to refuse unusually dangerous work, but they may not realize they have the right to know about safety hazards and concerns, or the right to participate in safety committees and identifying hazards. Some provinces have a 4th underlined right, and that's the right to a workplace free of harassment and discrimination. So a good idea is to make a poster like this, or you could print the slide, and then you would have that information. What about training records? Have you received safety training at your dealership? How about orientation? Are these training records readily available? OHS can now look and request those training records, and you could get a fine if you don't have these records available for them upon their request. So you want to ensure that your staff are competent in operating a forklift or powered mobile equipment, and they've completed their 16 hours of documented training, or that their training records as a competent operator of the overhead crane, because there's a lot that goes into the crane process. How do I rig properly? Where's the emergency shutoff? Where do I find my capacities on the crane? There's more to a crane than just hooking the hook on and operating the switch. Whmis training records for management. If you haven't taken a lot of safety training, on our website we have a package through a company called Whmis, and on that package you are able to take online safety courses for a minimal fee, and it comes with a database where you can track all of your accidents or injuries and training records and keep them all centrally stored. So that's something you may consider if you don't have a formal process currently in place right now. What about, have you guys ever used a WCB letter of good standing or a clearance letter? A letter of good standing it could be used on a contractor before the work begins. So the letter would tell you if the contractor has a WCB account and if their premiums are paid up to date. Then the WCB will issue you a letter of good standing, good for the day that they start the job or contract with you. Your dealership could also ask for a clearance letter. So before making a payment to the contractor for the work he performed, this clearance letter would tell you if the contractor's standing has changed and they may now owe WCB money. The dealership can choose to either pay the premium to the WCB for the work performed by the contractor and subtract it from the amount of the contract that they have to pay the contractor. So a good summary is a letter of good standing is required before work starts, and a clearance letter is requested after work is completed, but before payment is made to the contractor. Thank you guys very much for tuning into our presentation this morning on inspection results for farm equipment dealerships. If you'd like a copy of this presentation, you could contact me at rbast@motorsafety.ca or the good folks at QITA. They would be able to get you guys a copy of this presentation if you choose. I'd just like you guys to also remember, we do these presentations for you at the dealership. So if there are safety concerns or matters that you guys wish to discuss, let us know. We will do a webinar on that. We want to make this for you and stuff that you can use and take home with you at the dealership so it's effective. Our next presentation will be on ergonomics at ag dealerships, where we'll talk about some of those ergonomic concerns. Like I spoke of about the concave and the winch assembly removal project that we utilized, and various other projects like that we've seen, and some ergonomic improvements. I'd also like you to consider sending me some email feedback or the folks at QITA just to tell me what you liked or didn't like about the presentation. This would help us moving forward in delivering the best possible webinar for yourself. So with that, if there's any questions in the chat box, I will review those, and I see that there isn't any right now, but I can send like my email address is available. If people do have questions after the fact, we're always available for comments in that regards. So keep in mind, we welcome you to suggest us with future topics so that we have information available that you guys like. And in the meantime, call us if you do have any questions or concerns at the dealership regarding safety. So once again, thank you guys very much for taking the time this morning to participate in our webinar.